Recently, the channel has passed the mark for over 200 top 10 videos, so I thought now is as good a time as any to go over which cards appear the most in the top 10 videos, and also explain why I try not to talk about these cards as much as I can in newer videos. And starting off at number 10, we have a dual spot with Destiny Hero Malicious and Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. Now, what I did for research in this video was basically just go through the descriptions of all 200 videos, and then just write down a card that I thought would show up a lot, and then note how many times it did show up in addition to how many times it took the number 1 spot. So, Destiny Hero Malicious and Ultimate Conductor Tyranno has shown up a grand total of 6 times across different top 10 videos. However, neither of them took a number 1 spot in any of them. This is actually a very large amount of appearances for not actually taking the top spot of any of them. Although, it's pretty easy to see why both of these cards showed up so much. Now, I won't go into detail about any of the cards on this list. This is definitely more of a meta video about the channel and the top 10 lists rather than about a video on cards. However, a quick little rundown of the cards is probably appropriate. Destiny Hero Malicious is a +2 from the graveyard, and Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is the boss monster of the dinosaur archetype, which is unique of being one of the few boss monsters that still sees play, which is a main deck monster, which is probably why it appeared so often. And Destiny Hero Malicious is just a solidly strong card which isn't banned, as it's seen playing a whole bunch of different types of decks over the years, so it probably just fits in a whole bunch of different niches. Now, before I go over to the next spot, I did find something real interesting when I was going through my videos. I ended up keeping track of around 45 cards while I was doing the research, and one of the cards definitely stood out to me, although it doesn't have enough appearances as Malicious or Ultimate Tyranno to really make the video. And that card was Magical Scientist. It showed up a grand total of 3 times in 3 different top 10 videos, and took the number 1 spot in all of them. It's pretty much the only card which appeared multiple times that took the number 1 spot each time it showed up, which isn't surprising if you know how good Magical Scientist is. If you watched my series with Hardleg Joe during the Chaos Draft, as soon as I got Magical Scientist, I pretty much won every game where I was able to summon it. And I think it causes problem in pretty much everyone's drafting challenges if they're able to get the card. And also, a small little update here, Destiny Hero Malicious did take the number 1 spot of a video after I wrote the script, but before this video went live, so it now beats out Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. Next up at number 9, we have Raidraptor Ultimate Falcon. It showed up a grand total of 6 times across the videos and took number 1 spot twice. Once in a video about really hard to take out monsters, and another in a best cards to cheat out of the extra deck. Ultimate Falcon is basically the best card you can cheat out of the extra deck since it has 3500 attack and is immune to card effects baseline. Now, I'm kind of surprised to see one show up so often on the official list, because I bring up this card pretty much any time I need an example of an immune boss monster. So if I were to scour through all of my videos to see which cards appear the most, without actually being listed in the top 10, I bet Ultimate Falcon is probably number 1 card that's on that front. So the fact that it's also shown up 6 times in other videos in top spots is pretty appropriate. And at number 8, we have number 86 Heroic Champion Rhongomyniad. This one also ties with Ultimate Falcon. It shows up 6 times across videos and takes the number 1 spot twice. However, it also shows up with Ultimate Falcon a couple of times. Rhongomyniad is just a very oppressive boss monster, which wasn't a big deal for a long time, until they released a new piece of support which made it broken overnight. And since it had a long history before it was made broken, and also has so many different kinds of effects, it's no wonder it shows up so much, since I like to make a lot of really specific ideas about specific effects. And if a card just has a whole bunch of effects, chances are it's going to be picked up a lot in different kinds of videos. Well, not Rhongomyniad anymore since I banned the card. You see, in an effort to not make the videos incredibly repetitive to repeat viewers, I make sure to not include these cards that I'm talking about in this video. That way I don't have to explain what these cards do a million times. And it just makes the viewing experience a lot more enjoyable when you just see a whole bunch of new cards being explained, rather than seeing how I explain how Gossip Shadow made Rhongomyniad broken for the 7th time. Although that doesn't mean I won't mention the cards at all, as I just put all these cards at the end of the video with honorable mentions. A top 10 should go over the best 10 spots, no matter how many times they appear. Although, these videos are meant to be a form of entertainment, and the entertainment value kind of supersedes the list being 100% accurate. Especially if I just mention that they should have been in the video anyway at the end, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Anyways, at number 7, we have Red Eye's Dark Dragoon, which also ties its previous 2 spots. It appears a grand total of 6 times and took the number 1 spot twice. Once in a video about cards which negate everything, and another in a video about the best Dark Magician cards. Red Eye's Dark Dragoon is just an overpowered fusion monster which was made overpowered on purpose, and is generically splashable in a whole bunch of different archetypes and decks, just as long as you don't mind running 3 Gardens. This one's also kind of a no-brainer, and in fact I'm sure people probably expected this card to be even higher on this list with more appearances. Although, I added this card to my internal ban list pretty early, so the fact that it got 6 appearances even though I intentionally stopped talking about it, just goes to show how ridiculously good the card is. And at number 6, we have the Tyrant Neptune. This card has shown up a grand total of 6 times across videos, and has taken the number 1 spot 4 times. So, 2/3 of its appearances were at the number 1 spot. And this is definitely one that people asked me to stop talking about the most. And I think that's partly because it constantly kept taking the number 1 spot. And that could also be because the Tyrant Neptune is broken for pretty much just one reason. Its interaction with Lyrilless Independent Nightingale, and becoming a beast of a boss monster which is immune to everything and can burn your opponent for 5,000 points of damage every turn. So having to explain that one piece of trivia over and over is probably kind of annoying. And at number 5, we have Nibiru the Primal Being. This card also shows up 6 times and takes 4 number 1 spots. So kind of like the Tyrant Neptune. People were definitely tired of hearing about this card all the time, and I think that's partly because it took the number 1 spot so many times as well. And in fact, I think Nibiru and the Tyrant Neptune are tied for having the most amount of number 1 spot appearances, as even some of the cards that are a little bit higher on this list, which have more appearances, don't have 4 topping spots. Nibiru is just a hand trap which can single-handedly win you the game, if your opponent is playing a combo-heavy deck and doesn't have a negate for it after 5 summons. So it's a pretty powerful card that's useful in pretty much every deck, which explains why it took number 1 spot so many times. It's kind of hard for a card to be over Nibiru, when Nibiru can literally win you the game on its own, without you having to do anything besides just have the card in your opening hand. And at number 4, we have the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. Now, this one kind of surprised me. It shows up a grand total of 7 times across different videos, yet it doesn't take the number 1 spot a single time. In fact, I think half the time it doesn't make it into the top 5 of the videos it's in. It's also the only non-effect monster on this list, and Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon is really not that good. It saw some very niche play a couple of times in decks back around 2019, and part of the reason this card shows up so much is basically just a coincidence. There were a lot of videos which talked about unusual cards that saw play, non-effect monsters that saw play, or just cards within the Blue Eyes archetype and cards which received retrains, which Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon just kind of fell into all of those categories. And since it technically kind of saw play a handful of times, that actually puts it above a majority of the cards in the game when it comes to placing them on this list, as the best of lists are heavily influenced by which cards actually saw competitive play in competitive environments, because competitive players don't use bad cards. And at number 3, we have Spellbook of Judgment. This card has appeared a grand total of 7 times across different videos. However, it took the number 1 spot twice, once in the strongest cards of all time, and again in the most broken archetype-specific cards. As Spellbook of Judgment appeared a lot in my earlier videos, around 2019, and hasn't really appeared in a video in the past year or two. That's mainly because in the earlier days of making the top 10s, I kind of went through all of the ideas going over the strongest, most powerful cards early, where Spellbook of Judgment definitely would have shown up the most, as it's one of the most singular strong cards ever printed, and was banned only 4 months after it came out. Although if I were to remake the video on the most powerful cards of all time, I don't know if I'd put Spellbook of Judgment number 1 again. I probably would replace it with Maxi, but it is definitely up there in terms of power level. And at number 2, we have Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End. This card appears a total of 7 times and takes number 1 spot 3 times. This one isn't too surprising. Chaos Emperor Dragon was the first ridiculously overpowered card in the game, and is kind of the reason we have the Forbidden List in the first place. And so being one of the first broken cards ever printed, chances are it's going to show up a lot in a whole bunch of different kinds of legacy videos, and even in videos about erratas, because Chaos Emperor Dragon had its effect changed to no longer be broken, and in fact went completely in the other direction where it's no longer even competitive. Although, Chaos Emperor Dragon doesn't really show up in modern videos. This one's kind of like Spellbook of Judgment, where it showed up a lot in the earlier days of the top 10s when the videos were going over some of the strongest cards, because obviously Chaos Emperor Dragon would show up in those kinds of videos. And I didn't really intentionally stop talking about this card because it just doesn't really come up in videos anymore that I make, unlike the number 1 spot on this list. And at number 1, we have the Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode. This card shows up a total of 9 times across all my different videos, yet only takes number 1 spot a single time in top 10 monsters that cannot be special summoned. Now, the number of appearances this card had also kind of surprised me. I wasn't expecting it to beat out Chaos Emperor Dragon or Spellbook of Judgment, but it also kind of makes sense. When I first made my internal ban list, the 3 cards I placed on it first were the Tyrant Neptune, Nibiru the Primal Being, and the Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode. And even after being one of the first 3 cards I made a note to stop talking about, it still appeared in more videos than any other card, despite not taking as many top spots as Nibiru or Neptune. And the reason it takes so many top spots is because it kind of has a whole bunch of things going for it which just allow it to constantly come up in videos. It's a strong generic card that sees competitive play, the card can win you the game on its own, just like Nibiru, and it has legacy value because it's attached to one of the god cards. Plus, it just kind of fit into a whole bunch of niche topics like best cards with question mark for attack, or best cards which summon themselves to your opponent's side of the field, for example. So in hindsight, it's not surprising why it appeared so much. I just didn't think it would beat out Nibiru or Neptune when I first decided to make this video. Alright, and that's the video. Basically 11 cards which won't be included in top spots anymore, and also only mentioned as honorable mentions when appropriate.